All right. Hello, hello, hello. Good afternoon. And this is MJ once again. And somebody brought something to my attention. I mean, I've kind of always known about and seen, over the years on the internet, but there's a lot of videos going around about, America's worst neighborhoods or America's worst ghettos and so on, whatever. And I'm very, very big on the comment section of any video. I like to see what people are thinking or how they're thinking. And often, the comments never miss, right? With either the understandings may be very antiquated, or at the very least misunderstood and therefore embellished to draw a conclusion, and so on. So I wanted to do a quick video. Excuse me. I want to do a quick video on, just a brief outline, because this subject can go on forever, because the reasons why we have a lot of neighborhoods in America, particularly in communities of color, are the way they are the reasons are manifold. Meaning there's lots of reasons why they are the way they are. It's not just one reason. There is a racial component to it, a racial element. It can't be ignored, though a lot of people may try. I'd like to start with, I didn't think I was going to include these, but there are two sociological terms I'd like to include, is problemization. Problemization is a sociological term that you find in psychology, and it means putting problems or your country's problems or ills or woes into the hands or lap of another race. Like, for instance, the reason why taxes are high or inflation is what it is, or the housing market is what it is, whatever it is, because of immigrants. They might say Mexican people or something like that. Or the reason why we have bad neighborhoods is because of black people and the things that they do and so on. Whichever story you like. Okay, that's problemization. Containment is this sociological term meaning where people tend to deny that racism even exists. Of course, for a lot of people, when they think of the United States, they think of this melting pot. I think of it as more of a stew, but they think of this melting pot of, generally people are good, and we're all here just trying to live our lives and get along, and people aren't as bad as that. Oh, depends on who you talk to. Depends on who you read or what you read. And it depends on if there's what you're reading, is there like any framework behind it. So I want to start the video with that first and kind of segue into some notes that I took down that I'll read gently. And it's just a few. Just kind of like a brief contextual history of neighborhoods throughout America, whether may they be in the South, may they be in the Rust Belt, the Northeast, or what have you. Even in the West and out here in the West, Southwest even, situation may be a little bit different in circumstance than they may be or are or have been in other parts of the country. So the U.S. has the highest rate of poverty in the developed world, notwithstanding its immense wealth. These rates fall disproportionately on communities of color. Aside from the common tropes about poverty and things like inferiority, laziness, and just shit luck, there are structural components that highlight an intent to limit opportunities for poor people. One misconception about poverty is that poverty is more than just being low income. People think that, I think if I remember rightly, the poverty line in America is 18,800, something like that. And if you fall below that, in many cases, even above that, so you're making $24,000, you're considered low income. Therefore, the poverty line demarcates a difference between what we understand as poverty and low income. Well, in today's America, whether you're making 18,800 or 24,000, I don't know much what you can do with either income. Definitely can't buy a house. And these are what would be called subsistence wages. Also, so that's one of the misconceptions. It reflects also the well-being and inability to negotiate society relative to the education of an individual. Also, their socioeconomic status and their social exclusion based on institutional policies and practices. Now, this starts to get at the heart of institutional racism, limitations, whether may they be to higher education, may they be limitations to, let's just say, the corporate world, may they be limitations to people of color being able to get businesses off the ground because of the, some racist practices in the banking system, so on, that may not lend to or tend not to lend to people of color. And I think recently there was a scandal with a recent bank that got caught doing something like this just a few months back. If anybody remembers, I can't remember the name of the bank. But just when you thought this practice was something that you've only read about in history books, it's still alive and well today, at least I believe. And even if you are educated, you still face these limitations. Last theoretical framework I've read was that black man getting out of college with a college degree is 4 times less likely to get a callback for a job than a white man who just got out of prison. Now, let's just say that's the case. If that is the case, and those numbers or those stats are true, and if I remember rightly, the resource is pretty reliable, that signifies a systemic problem, maybe not an individual basis. So like when everybody was arguing about things like CRT doesn't necessarily, or critical race theory, it's not arguing racist people and such in the sense. It's arguing about systems and their outcomes. So if we look at the system and look at the disproportionate outcomes of, let's just say, roughly speaking, the same amount of people, whether they're black, white, or whatever, that go through the system, and look at their outcomes of who basically comes out on the other end, let's just say whether it's a loan or able to get their businesses off the ground or get their business off the ground in a certain area and so on, whatever, right? That's what this part is talking about. So now moving on to understanding poverty in context and relativity. We have to remember we live in what's called a state capitalist system. Most people just say in a capitalist system. That's not true. Capitalism and state capitalism are vastly different things. I'll be kind and generous and even charitable to say, maybe I'll retract, vastly different. But they are pretty different. Capitalism infers laissez-faire, no government intervention, free market. I argue there's really not a free market anymore based on the raising and lowering of interest rates, but that's for another video. State capitalist system is when the government has a lot of influence in the economy. And it's typically, arranged around what's called the Keynesian model, and I'll talk about that in another video as well. A state capitalist system relies heavily on the poor. Without people who are willing to sell their labor to the lowest of the low bidders, costs potentially will rise, taxes will potentially rise, and then we reach a new equilibrium where the diffusion of wealth may be tighter, or shall I say less diffuse than what currently is. Markets will become more competitive for people who are higher earners. Okay, so let's just say you got rid of poor people. Or let's just say you were able to create this floor, right, where you still had the idea that even though if people were making $18,800 to $24,000, the price floor, or let's just say the wage floor or something like that would be, let's just say, even though those people are making less, you can't charge them more, let's just say 2 times than what they make, or 1 time than what they make. So everybody makes it. Right? So you almost crowd out or squeeze out what would be considered lower or poor or poverty-stricken people. Right? So now the game is to get to higher income earners. Right? So if you have fewer poor people who are willing to work cheaply and efficiently, because of the numbers of them, as Marx would call the reserve army, if you're able to have those people around, it keeps taxes lower, even though a lot of poor people tend not to file federal taxes, but they pay taxes in other ways. Let's just say you were magically able to, limit that class by instituting a floor. Let's just say getting rid of these people altogether, and everybody made what we consider to be relatively good money, that's a living wage. Well, think about how that would increase everything else. Think about higher income earners, how much they would be taxed, because that floor, the people below that floor, will not be able to contribute the little bit they're contributing to the economy. Moving on. The movement of capital is historical. Firms have always been able to offshore jobs to other people, in a manner of speaking, who are tied to the land elsewhere. It's not much different than here in the United States. Most aren't able to up and follow the firm just when it goes overseas. They must sell themselves to any firm stateside that is willing to hire them for the time being. So, like, there was a law that was just passed where they got rid of non-compete laws, meaning if you leave a place of business, you can't work for their competition for like a year or 2 years or something like that. That is a limitation of the movement of labor. Let's just say your company that you work for 10 years, decides to get up and move to China or Indonesia or something like that. How easy is it for the average American to pack up their stuff and move to China or Indonesia to be able to keep their job? It's a heavy task. There's a lot of money involved. They might not have that type of expenditure to be able to do so. So we live in a system where capital has always been able to move. Firms, companies have always been able to move. Employers have always been able to pick up, especially large scale companies have been able to pick up their fold up their tent, so to speak, and move to another country. But labor can't do that. And now we are just starting to unravel the problem of them doing the same thing here by limiting the movement of labor. So, now, like, if you work for, I don't know, Microsoft, and you quit and Apple's your Microsoft's competition, you can now go work for Microsoft without any penalty. So, moving on. Class and wages. What is the middle class? What is the middle class income? If you're making, think about it like this. If you're making $50,000 in Mississippi, you're doing pretty well. If you're making that same $50,000 in California, let's just say like LA, you're probably going to be struggling. So when people say, what is a middle class? I don't know what that means anymore. In today's economic climate, in the U.S., there is no clear division of a class system. I argue that it's only recognizable by measuring the ability to leverage with purchase power. Not all money denominations are the same, as I mentioned earlier about California and Mississippi. So what we're looking at is purchasing power. What is your purchasing power like now relative to the past years? So let's just say if we've all heard stories of our grandparents who, I don't know, like candy bar was just a nickel, and a house was just a couple $1,000, or a car was a couple $1,000, a house was like $14,000, and so on. Whatever. We have to understand that their purchasing power was much different back then, right? Inflationary rates and standards were much different back then, and they were created differently. And I'm actually going to talk about a little bit tangentially about inflation and stuff like that in another video and how it works, because the understanding of inflation, is manifold. It comes on, and you're never going to get rid of it. It's going to come and go. It's going to be high. It's going to be low, and so on, or whatever. And I'll give you a hint about the next video. The president has no control over any of that stuff. Sorry. Okay. So your purchasing power, what you're able to leverage on, and basically what you're able to retain, as far as, let's just say, you have the 1.5 in the bank, you might be able to play with, the 0.5, but, if you can keep that $1 million in the bank and still maybe have it collect interest and so on or whatever, you may not be doing so bad. But a lot of people can't afford to get to that first million, or even that first $500,000. But where you live is going to be a huge predictor of your purchasing power. Once again, your purchasing power of $50,000 in Mississippi is much greater than it is in California. Love these, by the way. So moving on, urban centers. The term inner city used to be largely described. It was largely to describe places where black and brown people reside. It became a euphemism for dangerous communities. I think personally, this wording is now a bit dated, and typically so are the people who word things in this way. They're pretty much dated themselves. They tend to be older people. Right? More and more American cities are becoming more gentrified, which meaning there's a lot of developers coming in, working with cities to buy up property where poor people, particularly communities of color, are living or were living, moved them out, put up new fancy high-rise apartments or lofts and stuff like that, and start moving those people in and moving the former people out. And that helps. What it does is help expands the tax base. So if you had a lot of people who were poor, and let's just say they were getting government subsidy, or let's just call it welfare, these are people who are not necessarily contributing to the system. Right? So if you move them out and you move in a group of people who are, let's just say, higher tax or higher income earners, therefore paying a higher tax rate, when those are people who are going to help expand the tax base in that city. So now the young, typically white and upwardly mobile people are moving into areas that were once occupied by black and brown people. So I get it. A lot of cities now, what they've done is they moved a lot of black people further out in other parts of the city, where now the thing is to have this urban lifestyle. People like, the loft apartments or the boutiques or, the downtown frivolities where they can just leave their apartment, go a couple blocks to enjoy like a martini at a martini bar or something like that, or a glass of wine with their friends, maybe come back to their loft or their loft apartment, do some work online because maybe they work remotely and so on or whatever, and just kind of have this nice avant-garde type modern living lifestyle. And that's what we're looking at now. And a lot of the poorer people that have been moved out, I don't think the cities particularly care about where they went or how they got there, as long as they just get out of the way of what they see as progress. So a lot of these people get pushed deeper into more desperate, more poor communities. This a larger part of that existing community. So how a lot of this started was through the Great Migration that happened starting between 1916 to about 1970. Millions of African Americans moved from the southern states to the Midwest and the Northeast. As a result, many whites were uncomfortable with their new neighbors. In about the mid-30s, the U.S. government granted FHA loans to white recipients only, largely military vets. Now, this is how suburbs were created. And if you want more of an expansive understanding on that, I would recommend Nancy Eisenberg's book, White Trash. What she's talking about in her book is the class system pertaining to why they're poor white people in this country, and what she's heavily leaning towards, and I really suggest you read the end notes too, is that this isn't necessarily like kind of like some, result of the free market where you have winners and losers. She implies heavily that this is more of a design, and her evidence for this is pretty compelling, and I suggest everybody read that book, and I don't care what color you are. Read that book. It's a very, very good book. She talks about people of color in the book to make a point, but making that point only in contrast to the part of the argument that she's trying to drive home about why poor white people exist and how they've always benefited in some way over their black or brown counterparts. So as far as the suburbs, this was part of what was called white flight at the time. So this fleeing to the suburbs. And also, as a side note, if you notice a lot of black neighborhoods in most cities, you'll see a highway that goes through that city. So a lot of those people when they moved out of the suburbs, they still worked in the cities. So they had to get to the city. So they had to take the highway to get to the city. And by the way, there were still a lot of white people living in those cities that either couldn't qualify for loans because the loans were very restrictive to white people, but certain white people, kind of like this white Anglo-Saxon Protestant type thing. You couldn't even be Catholic and get one of these loans. So that was how suburbs had started, right? And over time, many whites moved from urban centers and into suburbs, and the tax base began to erode. So you have all these people moving out of the city moving out to the suburbs, no longer paying city taxes. They only work there. They don't pay the taxes there. All that tax base and all that money resides now out in the suburbs. So over time, subsequently, all the horrors of desperation followed due to the exclusion from productive education practices, meaning less funding because lower taxes. So schools don't get the proper funding. That's one problem. Exclusion from well-paying jobs because we still had lots of discrimination back in this time. And a police force that created a border between more well-to-do and safer neighborhoods and what was becoming known as what we call the hood. Much of it became a veritable wasteland over time, is what a lot of people refer to it as. So when we talk about racism and poverty, I believe there's an inextricable link. And remember, I'm just giving you basically the cliff notes on this. This is nothing new. This is nothing esoteric. This is nothing cryptic that only MJ knows, or only a handful of academics in the country knows, or something like that, or whatever. Anybody can look this stuff up. As I was jokingly saying to somebody earlier today, say if you went back to 1950 and you showed them your cell phone, and they said, "What is that?" And he said, "Well, this little device here, it contains all human knowledge up until 2024. Anything you want to know, anything that's ever been done in history, scientific, whatever has been done, I can read about it on this phone." And they say, "Wow, and also it makes phone calls." And they say to you, "Wow, that's pretty cool. What do you do with it, though?" "Oh, well, Facebook, TikTok, porn, music. And that's about it." So I think we waste a lot of time playing with our toys, other than utilizing the benefit of the added technology that we have today. Right. So just like right now, how I'm talking to you on this, and hopefully spreading a positive message and an informative message. This couldn't have been done years ago. So hopefully we can keep this more positive tradition alive by talking, communicating, and hopefully trying to move forward. So let me know what you think. Just drop me a line in the comment section when you agree, disagree, think I'm wrong. If I'm wrong, tell me where I'm wrong. I'm more than happy to address anyone here, and just hopefully someday we can have a positive conversation. And I will see you guys in the next video. Take care of yourselves and each other.